my name is Kira. I'm the virtual events coordinator with LifeGuides, helping to put together these events with these amazing panelists and these incredible discussions. For those of you who are new, we have a lot of new partnerships that have happened within LifeGuides over the past month and a half. So some of you, this might be your first Connect event, and drop 111 in the chat if this is your first Connect event, maybe one of your first exposures to LifeGuides. We love shouting out and we love acknowledging the people who are new and here and who are open to these connections. So for those of you who don't know, we are LifeGuides. We are a peer-to-peer support that your company has partnered with, completely free, where you get access not only to events like this, where we come in with very specific topics based on what your interests are and what we've seen is of importance to you and our LifeGuides members community, but also you have peer-to-peer support one-on-one with the guides that we have in our community that can support you through a wide array of life situations, mentorship, coaching. Maybe you need instant support and a friend maybe is too close, but you don't have other support systems. LifeGuides is perfect for you, and we'll dive deeper into that at the end as well. So this event is our LifeGuides Connect event. So it really is a beautiful space for you to find connection and to find a deeper sense of connection, not only to yourself, but also to these people in the conversations that we're having. So one of the things that we love to see is the actual connection being formed during the conversation. So if there's any transformations or breakthroughs or aha moments or a scenario that you've been through that sounds similar to what you've been through, then share it in the chat. Not only is it helpful for us to know that there are people here really resonating with what we're sharing, but also you never know if something that you have to say is going to impart some wisdom on someone or be a moment of transformation for someone. So with that being said, I'm going to tell you about our panelists and our moderator, and then we are diving right in. So we have Paul Wolfe. He's our guest speaker, and he is a human first leadership advocate. And he focuses on workplace cultures built on authentic connection, shared vulnerability, and purpose-led performance. And I know I can relate to this, but drop 222 in the chat if that's what you've wanted, but that's something that's potentially been missing in your workplace. I feel like most of us can relate to that. So for him, he's been on a mission for decades as an HR executive, and he's worked with some of the world's most prominent companies, including Indeed, Condé Nast, and Match. So he's here. He has a vlogcast. He has a book. He does beautiful work, and the work that he does specifically around human beings first is so special, and I'm really excited for you all to hear about that. So welcome Paul in the chat. I know we're all really excited to have him here. I've already heard GenaSis and Paul talk, and it's amazing. I've only heard them talk for a few minutes, and we get them for a whole hour, so it's going to be great. Now, we have our lovely lady GenaSis over here. She has over 25 years of experience navigating the corporate world as an outspoken woman in healthcare, clinical research, sales, and nonprofit environments. She has her MBA, and that has added depth and diversity to her character. She's a certified life guide, so she is one of our guides that you can book a call with. Paul is a guest speaker. He's not necessarily a part of our life guides community. He is in partnership with us, and we have similar values, and we've been working together to even more refine the work that we're doing. But GenaSis is a certified life guide, so she's someone who you can speak with one-on-one, have regular calls with, and grow alongside her. She's also a sex and relationship coach and a partner in a meditation app startup company, which I haven't even asked you about yet, GenaSis, but I'm so excited. So she's so passionate about empowering people to be their whole selves, emphasizing, valuing, and integrating masculine and feminine aspects, along with pleasure and play to bring healing at a personal and global collective level. So you all are in wonderful places and are here for a fantastic conversation. And then, of course, we have Dr. Dave. He is the moderator of this conversation, so he'll be guiding it, and he's the VP of our guides community. He has a wealth of wisdom, degrees in neuroscience and psychology, and all these other amazing fields that make him a perfect person to be a moderator for this conversation and to bring these two together in a cohesive way to discuss transformational leadership. So some of the things we'll be talking about are the outdated systems of leadership and how we can move towards human first leadership. Also, GenaSis is really wonderful with the female body. So she'll be talking about how, as a woman, how to navigate your work-life balance in regards to your hormones and a lot of other different topics of conversation that'll float from there. So without further ado, Dr. Dave, GenaSis, and Paul, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Kira, and welcome to the team. I appreciate you leading and getting us off started on the right foot. So let's jump right into it. One of the questions that I'm just curious to hear from both of you, we put it out in the promotionals as well, is your idea of what the platinum rule is. Everyone knows what the golden rule is, and for those who may need some refreshers, is treat others as the way you want to be treated. So I want to come to you first, GenaSis. How do you define the platinum rule?
Well, I'm a big fan of platinum in all its forms, but the platinum rule is one step beyond the golden rule in that instead of do unto others as you would like to have done to yourself, it's do unto others as they want to have done. So you're really meeting them as an individual and treating them the way they want to be treated.
The way they show up, meeting them where they are. And coming over to you, Paul, how do you define it?
The same way, and I think I like it because it reminds us to get to know people as human beings. So many times as leaders, especially HR leaders, we look at like, oh, we have a group of employees and we've got to do this for our employees. Well, they're human beings first before they're anything else, and everybody's different. I'm an introverted extrovert or an extroverted introvert. I can never keep it straight. So I'm fine like in big crowds for short periods of time, but then like I need to re-energize and like be by myself for a while. I had somebody on my team when I was at Indeed who really only liked praise in private one-on-one. So I learned not to praise her externally, like in an all hands meeting, but then I had plenty of people that liked the external praise. And so it really kind of reminds us to really get to know people and understand where they're coming from and trying to be mindful of meeting them where they are.
Absolutely. That reminds me of someone saying that they are an introvert masquerading as an extrovert, just kind of, putting themselves out there.
Something like that is what I am.
Okay, I can completely get down with that. Coming back to you, GenaSis, we were talking about this earlier, and it's hard for people to really get to understand what type of leadership their company is leading with. So is there a way that you can assess or understand which type of leadership your company has?
Well, I mean, there may not be a way to know for certain, but there's a couple of telltale signs. So a company with a transformational leader will simply shine. They will attract the top talent. They'll have low turnover rate. The employees will just like have that deep sense of satisfaction and that knowledge that they're part of something that's bigger than themselves. The company will easily be able to raise capital because investors will be attracted to that energetic magnetism, and they'll easily recognize how the leader is able to help the company meet their goals. The sales will flow in with ease because the sales team will be empowered, right? They'll be empowered to be creative with their own individual strengths, background, and expertise. And the relationships, all of the relationships are going to feel valued, and there's going to be a high degree of teamwork and loyalty. So, of course, the opposite would be true in a team, in a company that had more of a tyrannical leader, right? There's going to be constant struggle. There's going to be a lot of burnout. The leader's going to be out of alignment with the mission of the organization, and that's going to drain, the micromanaging and the dictating, that's going to drain the energy from the people and from the company.
So not a precise science, but at least there's ways that you can check to see, how is your leader showing up? And one of the things that we're talking about within this series is transformational leadership. So, Paul, you're an expert in this, subject matter expert in leadership, but also in humans first. We'll talk about your book in a moment. But how do you define transformational leadership?
I think transformational leadership is, I love GenaSis's definitions that she just gave. I also think you'll find transparency and vulnerability and empathy. You're going to find emotions that you don't typically find. In our pre-call last week, I don't want to give GenaSis, I don't want to take anything away from what you're going to talk about, but we talked about how, in my opinion, for a long time, if you go back 10 years, 20 years, leaders have been taught to be imposters. We've been taught to not show emotion, not, be vulnerable, have every answer, kind of control things. You think about the Mad Men era. You have to go back farther than I wasn't alive. I am old, but not that old. And now, we had the pandemic, and the pandemic was crappy for a lot of reasons, but I look for the silver threads that I can pull through to the other side. And I think really connecting with people and understanding them is part of transformational leadership, understanding your employees, creating deeper connections. And I'm not, I get asked this question a lot when I speak, like, oh, are you suggesting that the line between leader and employee goes away? I'm like, no, but you can create deeper connections with people that you work with so you can better understand them and they can better understand you. And it turns into stronger sales, more collaborative teams that'll run through brick walls for leaders because they care, they know their leader cares about them and protects them and has their back. And I think that, to me, is where, when you start to see those things happening in a company, that's amazing. But, if you're in a company that is tyrannical, using GenaSis' word, has a tyrannical leadership style or a controlling leadership style, it doesn't mean you as a leader need to be that way with your team, because there are plenty of subcultures within the broad culture of an organization. And so, you can start to build your own transformational leadership and human first leadership in your own team. And hopefully that starts to grow through the organization.
Of course, it starts with the individual, but then there are top-down approaches, which can be helpful. But I've noticed that from a bottom-up approach, when the crew, the team, is asking for a change, it seems to hit different, to use, lack of better words. GenaSis, how would you approach, we talked about the platinum rule, but how would you approach treating each employee or teammate based on their individual needs?
Sure. I mean, when I think of transformational leadership, I think of it as a more feminine approach. And so, as a woman or as someone who has easier access to their feminine characteristics, I feel like I have an advantage because we tend to be more collaborative, we tend to be more relational in nature. And, if you go back thousands of years, women were the leaders in a lot of cultures because of their ability to bring people together, to collaborate, and to create win-win solutions. And, really things that would benefit the entire clan, village, tribe, country, right? And I really love Susie Malone's book. It's called Women in Negotiation, because it really articulates how women have these natural superpowers when it comes to leadership, and specifically around negotiation, that instead of, viewed as a weakness, which frankly, women have been viewed as weak in the industry, they can actually be these strengths. So, I mean, for me personally, when I lead teams, I just make it a priority to get to know each person. And so I want to know what their background is, what their expertise is, what are they good at, what lights them up, what makes them really excited. How do they like to be communicated with? Like Paul was saying, do they prefer public or private praise? How can I encourage them to speak up and say something when they see something that's out of line, or they have an idea or a suggestion? And how can I reward them when they do? Really, at the end of the day, how can I support them to be their best self? And so with all of that information, then I can assign them to roles and to tasks that are best suited towards their strength. I just assume I'm not an expert at any of the subject matter, areas. Instead, I make it my priority to kind of keep the whole system functioning optimally. I hire great people. I let them use their personal magic, and I work on removing any obstacles that would impede that.
That reminds me of one of our colleagues, who we call the chief remover of obstacles.
The CRO.
The CRO, just getting things out of the way so that we can show up the best that we can. And I think that's such an interesting way to look at leadership, is removing obstacles so people can be more of who they are, especially the good parts. Coming back to you, Paul, we're talking about the juxtaposition and sometimes the marrying of feminine and masculine leadership styles. I want to hear a little bit about your experience, about what you've seen. You've been through with Indeed, you've been with some of the largest organizations in the world. Where have you seen the positive nature of feminine and masculine leadership coming together?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm using D as an example because I was there for almost 8 years. And when I started, we were 1,000 employees. And when I left in 22, we were 12,000 employees. And we also grew revenue from 500 million to kind of 10 billion. So it was, I refer to, there's a group of us that worked there at that time that have all left, but we still keep in contact. And we refer to it as the perfect storm because you don't always find that in an organization. But I think there are a couple reasons why we were able to protect our culture, be collaborative, connect as human beings in an organization. One of them was having a very clear and simple mission, which was Indeed's mission is we help people get jobs. So 5 simple words, everybody in the organization understood it, from the CEO to, a financial analyst, an HR coordinator, whatever the role, the span is. We all understood how we either directly, what we were doing every day impacted that, or indirectly impacted that mission. And there was a social good to it. We were in business. We were owned by they are owned by a Japanese company in business to make money, but there was a social good to what we were doing. So I think that's one of the first things when we talk about like transformational cultures is being very clear about why we all get up every day and come to work, and being excited about that is kind of, to me, one of the tenets. And then it's no organization, GenaSis, as I was listening to you describe kind of that perfect utopian organization in my mind, and I get a little pessimistic at times. In my mind, I'm like, that doesn't exist. And it doesn't, because nothing is perfect, but you want to try and have those pieces and those tenets around it to create this transformational culture and this positive culture, so that when there is a leader that isn't kind of following in that same footstep, they really stick out. Dr. Dave, you mentioned, when there's a groundswell from kind of grassroots, from employees pushing for change, it lands differently than if another leader says it to you, because these are the people that leaders really are there to serve. And we're there, GenaSis and Dr. Dave, you both said this, but like my job at Indeed, when we were 12,000 people, I had a team of 700. I had 8 direct reports. The people I directly impact every single day were those 8 direct reports, because that's who I talked to. And I really didn't do anything other than block and tackle and remove obstacles for those people who were functional experts in getting their jobs done. It's different when you're at a smaller organization. As a CHRO, a chief HR officer, chief people officer, you've got to roll up your sleeves and get dirty, but you still got to block and tackle. And so I think I think transparency is our friend. I think for a long time, companies have been scared of it. And I use the word scared because it's like, well, what if we tell them, these behind the door conversations? Well, what if we say that? And I'm like, well, what's going to happen if we say that? There's always the financial back and forth, especially with a public company, like how much you can say before earnings get reported and things like that. But like, give them as much information as possible, because what I learned during the pandemic at Indeed was, and I was, we were transparent to begin with, but I think we became uber transparent during the pandemic. We were forced to work from home. We were forced to work from home in a really crappy situation. We had racial unrest, economic uncertainty, a contentious presidential election. Unfortunately, we're going through one of those things again right now. And it's like, okay, like there isn't a lot of data. I've got to make decisions to protect our employees without data. One of our values was being data driven. So I was honest about that. And I'm like, we went to work from home March the 3rd of 2020, which was like a week before a lot of the big tech companies. And there was some pushback about like, why this is nothing. It's like it's a bad flu. And I'm like, look, like my job is to protect 12,000 of you in 20 different countries. If you can show me data that supports what your opinion, let's talk about it. But for right now, this is what we're going to do. And I'm glad we did it, because it wasn't just like the flu. It was, we've all lived through the calamity that was the pandemic. But I think there are certain things like, having leaders that understand it and can be empathetic. I think transparency is part of it, a very clear mission about why we come to work and what we do and how what we do impacts our mission or supports our mission. And then just a lot of clarity about how the business is doing, how I'm doing as an individual, how my team is doing. I think all of those things become tenets of what transformational leadership, human first leadership, whatever label you want to put on it, really looks like.
You mentioned human first leadership. You're talking about meeting people not only where they are, but just as a human, not as a cog in a machine. And it's important, I think, that we honor people and allow them to show up as they are. And how important is it to share that information that is valuable to certain parties? So would it be beneficial, for example, for someone to know XYZ? You talk about transparency, and when you let people in, they feel trusted, they feel valued, they feel like they have a voice. GenaSis, I want to go back to the feminine principle. You know, we were talking about, you know, the juxtaposition there, but talk to me a little bit about what happens when the feminine principle kind of mixes with that dictatorship model, or how they can clash. What is your
Mm.
experience in that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I worked for an organization that, luckily had a very charismatic founder. And, he was super visionary, and it was great to be, like literally on my fourth day, there was the big, all hands meeting. And on my fourth day of working at this company, it was like, oh, I get it. I know how what I do connects in, how that serves the patients, the people who at the end of the day, this was related to clinical trials, the people who at the end of the day are ill and taking this medication, and how that information serves the pharmaceutical companies. And like it was so clear that I could understand my role in it all. And that's really where I came in as a project manager, and I was leading a team of programmers, of testers, software, like skill sets I don't have, right? So, but my role was like keeping everybody, working together and on schedule. And that took some intuition. It took some flowing, right? I mean, this was a new field to me. Um, and so it was a lot of like learning, trusting, flowing, tuning in. We had this charismatic founder, but then we had a leader that was a little more in the dictator type of thing. And then of course some of the pharmaceutical companies I was working for, some of them were, really too. And so I found myself like receiving the intensity from the pharmaceutical company or from the CEO, and kind of digesting that, protecting my team from it, but then using that to make some decisions about how to change or adjust. And then also recognizing, okay, what the CEO really needs is he needs the data. He needs to understand, how far are we? How close are we? Are we going to make the deadlines? What's the budget looking like? So I kind of got to do this dance in between, right? Of like providing what was necessary this direction, protecting my team behind me, and making sure that they had what they needed. So, I mean, that's the great thing about masculine and feminine energies, right? We all have both, and in
Yeah,
varying degrees at varying times, and we can pull from the toolbox of what's most appropriate at that time.
that's a good.
Balance.
I was about to say that's a good segue into the talking about balance. How can leaders balance that energy? Because corporate, as you mentioned, Mad Men, immediately Don Draper comes to mind. Hyper masculine, takes over, takes charge. How can we start to find that balance? Because there is a need to balance and bring in more feminine energy in the workplace. Paul, not an easy question, but any thoughts on how we could continue to find that balance?
I think it's about like knowing your audience and knowing the people that you work with, whether it be a peer, a boss, somebody that reports to you, somebody that doesn't report to you, that's just on another team that you've got a relationship with. I also think situational leadership, which goes back to like, I learned about it 20 or 25 years ago when I first started as a manager. And I still think you need to, if somebody's doing something for the first time, you're going to be a bit more directing, which gets to the Don Draper. It's like as GenaSis talking, I'm like, just watch an episode of Mad Men, and that is when you see the two clash, and sometimes in bad ways, sometimes in good ways. But you still need to be directing. But being directing with that person that's new at a task doesn't mean that you're overbearing or controlling. You're just spending more time with them. You're giving them more feedback. You're being more patient with them. You're being more empathetic with them, because we've all been there. My first time as a manager, like people become managers. I've never been a manager before. Like, I think I know what it is, but you have no idea, and you learn on the job. And so I think going back to that situational leadership, using the other example of where you're kind of, somebody's been doing something for 5 years, they're effective at it, they're good at it, you're very hands off. You're still going to check in with them, like, is everything going okay? Any issue? Like, let's just keep the communication lines open. Let me know what I can do to help support. Holler if you need anything is something I always say to people when I sign off with them. And I mean it. But like, so I think going back to, there are some things that we learned, a long time ago that have been around, like managerial and leadership concepts from past decades that are still very useful, along with empathy and vulnerability and transparency and just caring about people as humans.
Got to care. And we've talked about servant leadership here a lot. Caring about your people, caring about the people that report to you or are directly affected by your decisions is a key indicator of your leadership style, how you're going to show up. And it's important that we keep that in mind. It's important to care. Like, I've said that a couple times. GenaSis, I want to take a kind of a pivot here, but talk about something that is dear to my heart, because I'm curious to learn more about how we can learn about the cycles that women go through and how to harness those cycles within the workplace. Because just as a quick kind of lay of the land, some men, I'll speak for myself, have been quite I'll say that they're kind of shaking it in their seats about talking about, women's lives, women's biology. When I find that to be kind of fascinating, because we don't say the same thing about breathing. We all do it, but as soon as someone talks about, a woman's issue, it's like we all start trailing off and thinking about shoes or something like that. So you're right.
I'm always thinking about shoes, Dave. Come on.
Okay, I mean,
as am I.
So am I. So that was probably not the best reference, but I think we get it there. So how can we harness the cycles that women go through in the workplace?
Sure. I mean, and actually, I want to expand it. It's more than women as well. I mean, humans, we're not static robots, right? So dictating and pushing to consistently deliver, boom, 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 just not going to work, right? We're dynamic, we're ever-changing beings. We have needs, we have emotions, they fluctuate. It takes various degrees of energy to be able to navigate this, right? And so as humans, we need balance between that push, that pull, that drive, that rest, that yin, that yang, right? Otherwise we're going to burn out. And so or worse, developmental health challenges, right? So by using cycles, we can balance the workload and make it beneficial for everyone involved. Because we're really working with what is at that point, right? So great example. Some people are divorced. They have shared custody. So setting up a work schedule in which they have longer work hours on the days or the weeks that they don't have the kids, and they have shorter work hours on the days that they do have the kids, so they can pick them up and go to practice and that can be a great strategy. That can help balance. So over the course of the month, they're still working the same number of hours, but maybe they have weeks with a little more and weeks with a little less. Just an example. To your question directly, menstruating women. We have times in our cycle in which we're more outgoing and driven, around ovulation, and therefore doing sales, doing presentations, putting ourselves out there, great time because it's naturally supported by the hormonal soup we're swimming in. In contrast, closer to the menstruation days, we're more internal. But by being more internal, we're actually a bit more creative. We're more in tune. PMS is essentially being more sensitive to what's out of alignment, what's out of integrity. So use that time to be like, what's going on in the organization that needs some tweaking? What can we do about it? Because again, naturally, it's aligned better. So when we align with the cycles, we're optimizing capabilities while supporting the needs. There's a whole book called Wild Power. Alexandra and Sojourner, and it's incredible. And it really goes into the details of menstrual cycle awareness and about how the different hormone mixes throughout the month lead to these external or more internal characteristics. But even the cycles of the moon, right? That can affect all genders. When you've got, expansive new ideas, new growth, from the new moon through the waxing phase. And then letting go, releasing, closing out the old from the full moon through the waning phase. So again, it's going to come back to knowing and understanding the individuals involved, but just not expecting me all the time. Like, let's just start with that we all fluctuate in different ways.
Making that space to fluctuate too, I think is important.
Yes, freedom to flow.
Okay, okay, we're coining new terms here. Freedom to flow that might be used more often. I'm curious about what more can we do? So everyone in the chat, first, before I ask my question, everyone in the chat, if you've had a strong woman leader, put a smiley face in the chat. I have learned my style of showing up from the women leaders that I've connected with. Even the women leaders that I haven't connected with, like Brene Brown, for example. She's been instrumental in my leadership style, and her energy has helped me kind of understand, okay, maybe I need to pull back a little bit on this or add a little more here, add a little bit more of the feminine voice. So I love to see the engagement there. Now, men on the call, don't feel, left out. We're going to come to you in a second, but I think it's important that we honor, the epic feminine first. Now, coming back to my question, I wanted to ask you, Paul. We're talking about transformational leadership, and we're talking about the styles. What are some of the outdated styles that we need to evolve from or move away from?
I think, I think just control is one of them. Like, look, the only thing I could control, and I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday, the things I'll worry about are the things that I can control. I can't, we were talking about the presidential election. I don't want to get political, but like, I can't control it. I can do my part in it. I can't control it. I'll have to deal with it come November the 6th or whenever we find out the results. But like, I can't control it. And I think you can't control everything, and you shouldn't control people. You shouldn't try to control people, because you really can't. You can control yourself. You can control your emotions, keep things in check. I also think the secrecy, HR gets this, and I was a big proponent of being very transparent from an HR perspective, like, what it means if we're going to do an investigation, even not using the word investigation because it puts people on the defensive to begin with, what it means to go on a performance improvement plan, what it means to go on a final written warning. Let's educate people to what those are, because sometimes HR is like the Wizard of Oz. There's a big black curtain and somebody's back there pulling strings. And that's I think, for a lot of reasons, HR itself has perpetuated that misnomer, and it's not. It's like, just here's what it is. I also think the more that something we were talking about before, but the more perspectives you get about something, the more you bring people in and you can hear their voice and their opinion, the better a solution is going to be. There's this story that goes around, like the first iPhone, there were a bunch of right-handed engineers that built the first iPhone. And for us lefties, it wasn't overly useful. They've since fixed that. But like simple things like that. Left-handed people, we kind of get a bad rap. Sometimes stuff doesn't work for me. You have to buy a special left-handed notebook or whatever the case may be. And so I think the more that you take that secrecy away, the more that you involve people in the conversation, the better that it's going to be. And then I think just emotions in general. And they don't have to be masculine or feminine. I think, vulnerability is not either. I think we find that more women are vulnerable than men, but we can all tap into our feminine and masculine sides. And I think just being vulnerable and opening up, it's a scary, scary behavior, emotion, whatever label you want to put on it. But I have found in my career that it is one of the most powerful tools that you have in your bag of tricks to create new and deeper connections with people. And being empathetic, being sympathetic, having an understanding. I think, GenaSis, you were talking about, women dropping kids off at school, like men dropping kids off at school too, knowing what's going on. Like, yeah, you should get out of here because your son's soccer game, you coach the soccer game and you need to leave. No, you don't need to come into the office because I want you to have flexibility. I'm a big, not forced return to the office type person. It's about flexibility. And I think hybrid is a nice place that we're seemingly starting to land. So I think those are the things that we were taught a long time ago and have carried through. And I think some people still think that that's the way. I think they think a lot of leaders, if you can control all these things, you can control your emotions and what people see, you can control people, you can control the environment, that it's going to be perfect. And it's not, because we can't control everything. The world is the world. Life is life. Like I can't, I don't know. Hopefully I'll be here tomorrow. I might not be here tomorrow. My mom was killed 30 something years ago when I was 25 in a freight car accident. That was not in my world plan at the time when I was 25 years old. And so I think that just changed my perspective on things. So I can control me, and sometimes I can't even control me, but I'm going to focus on that, and I'm going to just try and make connections. I find that connections with people, whether they be purely just professional or personal and professional or deeply personal, those create lasting relationships, and those create teams of people that will really come together and do great work.
This reminds me of a conversation we were having right before this session, and I wasn't going to bring it in, but this seems like an important part. You talked about just what you can control, right? And you talked a little bit about HR and them being the Wizard of Oz, so to speak. And I looked at a poll from Business Solver that showed that 75% of HR professionals view someone with mental health issues as weak or burden, at 72%, which is down 6 points from 2023. Interestingly, it's up 8 points for CEOs. I wanted to talk about the balance that the teams need to have, talking about HR and leadership, CEOs, because you're right, HR can be like the Wizard of Oz, and then sometimes the CEO is the Wicked Witch of the West. Sometimes. Sometimes they're wonderful. I mean, but let's talk a little bit about that number. Like, what comes to mind for you when you hear that HR professionals are slowly, starting to view people with mental health issues as a burden less? What comes to mind? Let's start with you. Go ahead, Paul.
I'm disgusted by it. And I'm not here to point fingers at anybody, but look, at the end of the day, my guess is a vast majority of us have some mental health challenge that we're dealing with, or that sits in the background, or whatever the case may be, some worse than others. I think mental health is a spectrum. Just like health is, physical health is a spectrum, financial health is a spectrum. And I just want, everybody's got their own, I'm going to use a bad word, sorry. Everyone's got their own shit going. Whether it be good or bad, like we all, similar to cycles that GenaSis was just so wonderfully talking about, we all go through like peaks and valleys from an emotional perspective and what's going on. And people are people, and you've got to figure out, I just go back to what GenaSis says, how do we tap into what your strengths are? And the job, it's not all about strengths-based jobs yet, but okay, if I've got somebody who's a financial analyst on my team and I'm a director of finance and they're phenomenal at strategic thinking, they're a whip with a Google worksheet, an Excel spreadsheet and things like that. Okay, let's do that. The things that they're not so great at or they don't really like, let me make sure they've got the right support and they've got that, creating that environment for them, because nothing's going to be utopian. I go back to that again. That's one example, but just like somebody with a mental health issue, whether it be anxiety, whether it be bipolar disorder, depression, whatever the case may be, they're dealing with their thing. Understand how you can best support them and how you can support them in getting their job done and supporting them with whatever they're dealing with. I'll give you a personal example. I was diagnosed with anxiety disorder and OCD 15, 16, 17 years ago now. It was all fine. Mental, behavioral modification and medicine helped, fine, under control. Pandemic comes, my OCD has no way to come out, because mine was when I was leaving the house, checking to make sure the iron was off, the stove was off, the door was locked repeatedly. That's how it manifested itself. Well, now you're home 24/7 and it's there, and there's how does it manifest itself? For me, it started to manifest itself in skin picking. And I ended up with sores on my feet, and I was talking to my therapist virtually and my doctor virtually, and we were trying different drugs and all this other stuff. And Anybody who's had a mental health challenge, most of the drugs, you have to step your way up to a level. And then if you have to change, you've got to step your way down. So it's a lengthy period of time. Also, for some reason, I seem to have every side effect that those long lists of things we get from the pharmacy, I could check them all off for some of these things. And so I was going through this in the summer of 2020. And one day in a meeting, somebody made a comment to somebody that was on my team about me in the meeting saying, oh, something must be going on. We must be gonna, like, I think a layoff is coming or people are getting fired because Paul's acting weird. And this person told me, they're like, I don't think anything's going on, but I just want to, and so it hit me, like the reason I was showing up differently is because I was dealing with my own shit. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, we had started a weekly Q&A, which most every company did, but also this weekly email from me, which is so funny because I had like an 87% open rate, which is unheard of, especially from an HR leader. People don't want to read stuff from a CHRO. Trust me, I know. I did the job for 25 years. And so, you know, I had a great internal comms manager who would draft it for me, and she got to understand my voice. And she usually sent it to me on Wednesday afternoon. We'd look at it, play with it, and then it would go out Thursday morning religiously. So she sent it to me that Wednesday in August. I looked at it, changed a couple things. I added 2 paragraphs about here's why I've been showing up differently and here's what's going on. And I didn't think about psychological safety because I knew I had it with my boss, who was our CEO, and I felt comfortable with my peers. And so it just went out. And this is an extreme example, and this is where we get back to the spectrum of things, because you can be vulnerable and just saying you don't know how to do something, and you can be vulnerable as the example I'm giving. And so, you know, I went through my day with meetings. I had a break in the afternoon. I'm also an inbox 0 type of person. When I see the little red number next to my inbox, it gives me anxiety. My husband, he is not here right now, but he has like 4,232 unread emails. And I can't look at his telephone. It just makes me, I get my hands sweat. It makes me uneasy. So that afternoon I come and I have like 400 unread emails. And like, my first thought was something happened to some employee and like, why didn't somebody call me? So then I start looking at the subject lines, and it's all, you know, RE regarding, or in regard, Paul's weekly email. Wonderful name for my weekly email. And I'm like, we spelled somebody's name wrong. We got somebody's title wrong. Like, you know, it's like all these things are going through your mind. And then I started to open them, and it was like, I have OCD. Here's the drugs that I'm on, the milligrams. Here's what I'm doing. I have bipolar disorder. I have depression. It was like this, like, and that's not the reason I did it. I just wanted to put the thought that something was going on from a company perspective to rest. It was me, and I was dealing with my own crap. And it was amazing. And that there's a very extreme example that I'm not suggesting everyone to do, of vulnerability. And I, like, you know, there are 12,000 employees, there's one of me. I did not know all of them, but I got to know another 300 or 400 of them that I didn't know because of these emails. And I spent that weekend like responding to all of them, because like, it's like, okay, you took the moment to share something with me that was very personal. Like, I'm going to follow up with you and like check in or whatever, whatever the email was, I was trying to kind of make it full circle. So I think we've got to step out of this leaders are perfect, leaders know everything era into leaders are humans as well. And we're dealing with our stuff, and whether, you know, it may be a good week or a bad week or a good month or a bad month or whatever the case may be. And so like, I may be a little different, and hopefully my team, because I've taken the time to build deeper connections with them, they know a bit about me in a deeper way too. And they can read that and kind of step in, like, what can I do to help? How? Because there was one time when I worked at American Express early in my career that I worked on a true high performing team. We did not have a leader. The leader left and she didn't get replaced, and they just didn't give us a leader. And there were 10 of us. We knew each other really well. We had each other's backs. We did shit to make our team look good because we didn't have a leader, and we worked collaboratively on everything. And when somebody, you know, going back to skills-based, when somebody didn't have a skill that they needed, we supported them and surrounded them and had their back. And that's, as an employee, I wasn't a leader then, that's an amazing experience, to experience that group of people coming together to do something without one person being in charge. Like that's utopia to me. As a leader, like, I just like, I'll block and tackle and like, you know, pat you on the back and support you like any day of the week if that's the team. Sorry, that was a really long answer. I apologize.
No, I'm thankful for that answer, because again, you're giving an example of vulnerability. And you're also giving an example of the platinum rule. In that message, you were teaching the people around you how to treat you or how to show up for you. And it's okay to let people know what you're going through, and also so that they can support you, or you can find the right support at the time that you need it. It's absolutely wonderful to hear you in the position that you were in doing that, because gone are the days of just suffering in silence and then leading to burnout. Oh, why did he burn out? Probably because we work in a slow pressure cooker and he was not venting. And I don't mean like yelling about, today's
No.
baseball stats.
Right.
Well, and you also, it's like imposter syndrome. Like I'm
Mhm.
showing up in a way that's not me and that's not good for me. To your point, like, there have to be pressure releases, and it's not yelling at people, but it's just like getting it out there.
We got to get it out.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. The more, if one person thinks about things differently, that's like what my job is. It's my job.
It gave me chills. It literally, like, I felt my whole body go, oh, the freedom of being able to be vulnerable, be seen,
Yeah.
and then getting that response. People going, they felt seen, right?
Yeah,
they felt understood.
I saved all of those emails when I left. Like I didn't
I
like
bet.
It's not proprietary or anything, but it's just like it's a moment in time, and like you want to be able to remember what that felt like.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to be able to go back.
Yeah. You were shining a light on something that has been hidden in the darkness, in shame. Mental health challenges are constantly being shamed. And by shining a light on it, you've humanized it, you added love to it, and they felt your love, and they sent love back. They felt seen, they felt heard, they felt understood. And I mean, just huge, huge gift that you gave that day.
Right. And I want HR leaders to think about this stuff differently. Like tap into it and figure out how to build an environment where everybody can be successful. And not just HR leaders, but that's where it starts, and CEOs, but leaders. And it's also, GenaSis, when you were talking about kind of women's hormonal cycles and menstrual cycles, people get uncomfortable when that comes up. People get uncomfortable when you bring up mental health. And I think some of it is the fear of uncertainty, or I don't want to say something wrong. You would get a lot of that when we would talk about diversity, inclusion, and belonging from leaders. Well, I'm going to remain silent because I don't know what to say, or I want to screw something up. Like, you can't do that. You can't just sit off to the side. You've got to be a part of it. And if you don't know, educate yourself, ask, respectful questions to better understand somebody's lived perspective, or whatever the case may be. And I think that's how we get to these transformational kind of leaders and transformational cultures.
Completely agree. I'm all about normalizing the conversation, whether it's talking about sexuality, it's talking about mental health, it's talking about, gender, LGBTQ, all of the things. Like, let's pull out shame only lives in the dark. If you shine a light on it, you add love to it, and it dissolves. And being a shame-based society isn't helping us. So let's be a love-based society.
Right. And what you're doing there, there's a term in clinical spaces, name it to tame it. And sometimes it's a challenge. People feel uncomfortable talking about women's challenges or mental health. But when you name it, when you call it out, you are acknowledging it. It's not in the dark, festering and growing. You're actually bringing it to the table, and it takes courage to do that. And for the HR professionals that are in here, or even the leaders that are in here or taking in this content, have the courage to have these difficult conversations. Like she said, do your research, and that's valuable. Matter of fact, all right, everyone in the chat, put in a 222 if you felt valued by your leader when they really just showed up and saw you for who you were. Like, if you've been seen by your leader before, at least once in your life, throw in 222 into the chat.
There we go.
Wow. Oh, wow. Okay. I'm literally blown away by this. Like, this is powerful. When you see people for who they are, when you see people even with their challenges, they want to show up for you. They'll run through that literal brick wall for you.
They will.
Yeah. Now, I also want to put a plug in here, right? So like every leader has a million things pulling at them, and their direct reports are having a variety of challenges that they may or may not have experienced themselves. That's where LifeGuides comes in. Hello, there's a life guide for that. If they're struggling with taking care of a mother who has Alzheimer's, there's a life guide for that. If they're struggling with their kiddo that is having gender dysphoria and considering transitioning, there's a life guide for that. There are so many personal experiences that we have had collectively. We're drawing upon our wisdom. So encouraging your team to schedule a call, to look through life guides, pick somebody that has something that you resonate with, and just have a conversation about something that you don't really have someone else to talk to about. So that's why we're here. And I personally am completely lit up every time I have a call with a member. It's such an amazing gift to be able to be present with people as they're going through challenges, situations, and successes, celebrating right along with them.
Well, since we're in the mood for plugging, I want to toss it over to you, Paul. I want you to tell us a little bit about your book. I know we've got some materials that'll go out as well for people who are interested, because this is needed in the workplace. This should be a one of those tabletop books that whenever you walk into your HR office, it should be there.
I appreciate that. My book, I'm good. I've gotten good after a year and a half. It's been out for a year and a half. Human Beings First, Practices for Empathetic and Expressive Leadership. Amazon, you can go to paulwolfe.com, buy it there. You can buy it any place books are sold online. It takes you through 8 leadership commitments, or 8 commitments you can make to yourself to show up more as an empathetic leader, as a human first leader. Reflecting through all perspectives, sharing more of yourself, vulnerability plays in there, seeing those less visible, listening to what must be heard, both the good and the bad, like the good, the bad, and the ugly. You've got to listen to it all. Carrying through action, so knowing how to take care of somebody on your team. Connecting through storytelling has been around for eons, and it is the way we history gets handed down, traditions get handed down. It's such an impactful thing. Helping where it's welcome. You got to know whether somebody's willing to have you help or not. And then protecting your people, which is blocking and tackling and sticking up for your team as needed. And it goes into those 8 commitments and talks about how, as leaders, you're humans and you need to show up first as a human being and embrace that. And you also need to look at your employees that way. And I think it's targeted towards leaders in corporate America. But I think the most utopian thing for me is that any human being reading the book could create a deeper connection or a new connection, or think about a relationship in a more positive way by reading the book. And there is I think Kira put up the link to it, and there's a QR code too that I think will be shown later in the presentation.
Fantastic. Wow. Well, this is actually a good point to bring Kira back on and move to close. But before we do, I just want to just personally say thank you both for this wonderful time. This has allowed me to dig a little bit deeper into what I don't know, and increase my curiosity to learn more about the pieces that can help me show up as a better leader. So thank you so much. Just personally for me, I wanted to say. And if anyone, if you're within the crowd, or if you're watching this on the replay, make sure to share this with someone if you know that this information can help support someone feel seen, or help them be better than they were yesterday. Even if it's just 5% better, we always want to get just a little bit better than the day before. So anyway, I know we're towards the end. I don't want to take up too much time. I'm going to pass it over to you, Kira, and thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow, what a beautiful conversation. Drop 333 in the chat if you took away something that you know is going to help you walk different on your path. I know there were a lot of really cool conversations happening in the chat about, being that leader and taking on maybe the brunt for some of your team members where there is that dictatorship, or people sharing that Paul's vulnerability was so impactful. And I feel like these conversations and these stories are the moments that really give us that pivot point into our lives of starting to make change, starting to see things differently. And I've talked about this in different events that I've done, but there's also the law of familiarity, where you hear something so often from your leaders and you hear like the same voice and the same tone and the same everything. And even though what they say hits and like makes so much sense, sometimes it doesn't hit the same when you're so familiar with someone. So that's why having a resource such as LifeGuides can be so helpful for you. And that's where these connect calls can be really helpful, because maybe you are having these conversations in your organization, but sometimes it just takes a new voice and a fresh face to have a moment where you're like, oh my gosh, that is so different. And I've heard it in different ways during this conversation. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to put up Paul's QR code. This is Paul's QR code here. You can scan, you can find the book here directly. We also have our next LifeGuide Connect event happening next month. It is on September 11th, same time. We do these Connect calls every second Wednesday of the month. And we look at what are the topics that our members are booking calls for, who are the guides that we can bring out, what are the conversations that are going to be really impactful. And wildly enough, the Grief Journeys conversation, Exploring Every Path, is actually happening on September 11th. So that's not going to be the main topic of our conversation, but there is a lot of collective grief that so many people are experiencing on that day. And our grief conversation is about a lot more than just death. It's about navigating the parts in your life where maybe you move to a new place, or you go through a breakup, or you lose a pet, or friendships are ending, or maybe you're grieving a past version of yourself. There's so many different layers to grief, and for us, it's really important to showcase that, and for there to be permission to be vulnerable in the spaces where you need. So with that being said, I will drop the registration link in the chat for you to register for the next event. And beyond that, I highly encourage everyone who's here to look at using LifeGuides as a resource. I know sometimes it can be a lot to maybe add another call to your plate when you have so much going on, but this is the one call that you can schedule a week or bi-weekly or once a month, where you get to take time directly for yourself and directly for your growth in a way where it's just all about you and you get that support. And one of the things that we've heard from LifeGuides is that people say it's more casual than therapy, but more qualified than a friend. And you have that support. And you don't always, if you're the people leader, you don't need to always be taking on the problems of everyone else. You can have a place to go. Or maybe if you're the team member who usually goes to your leader, maybe you go to LifeGuides instead, because we all know how overworked we all can be at sometimes. But this is a resource where you get to come in and get the support and guidance that you need. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for this amazing conversation. We will have the recording sent out tomorrow, so you can send this recording to your friends. There will be takeaways in there as well, and just stay tuned for more coming from LifeGuides, because this is just the very beginning. Thank you so much, Dave and GenaSis and Paul. It's been an absolute pleasure, and have an amazing day, everyone.
Thank you all.